Okay, let's dive into one of the most bizarre and frankly perplexing criminal cases in all of American history. We're talking about a story that involves a terrifying crime spree, a legal defense that had never been tried before, and a journey deep into the fractured mind of one man.
So picture this. It's the late 1970s on the Ohio State University campus. There's this wave of absolute terror sweeping through the community. Young women are being attacked, and police are scrambling to find the person they've started calling the campus rapist.
And then they get a break. A victim actually identifies her attacker from a mugshot. And to top it off, fingerprints found in another victim's car sealed the deal. The suspect? A guy named William Stanley Milligan, who, by the way, was already on parole for some pretty serious stuff.
So the charges against him were incredibly severe. And the evidence? It looked overwhelming. I mean, on the surface, this seemed like a totally open and shut case. But, as you're about to see, this was just the very beginning of a story that would seriously challenge everything people thought they knew about crime and justice.
Because right here is where the story takes a hard left turn into uncharted territory. Milligan's defense team was about to propose an argument so wild it would completely shake the American legal system to its very core.
So let's get into it. This wasn't just some clever legal trick. It was a psychological diagnosis that would change the entire game.
To really get what's happening here, we have to talk about something called dissociative identity disorder, or DID. Now, this is a super complex condition, usually brought on by extreme trauma, where a person basically fractures into multiple distinct identities. They're often called alters, and each one can have its own name, its own memories, its own personality, and for Billy Milligan, this diagnosis was going to be everything.
And here's the absolute bombshell they dropped in court. They argued that Billy Milligan, the main guy, the core personality, was innocent. They claimed he had zero memory of the crimes because, they said, two of his other personalities had committed them. This was a brand new defense, not guilty by reason of insanity because of his multiple personalities.
Well, you can imagine this sent the psychiatric world into a total frenzy. Suddenly, doctors had this massive task of trying to map out the incredibly complex inner world of Billy Milligan, to figure out just who was living inside his head. And the number they landed on? It's just staggering. At first, the doctors found 10 different personalities. But as they kept digging, they eventually uncovered a grand total of 24 distinct alters. 24 people, each with their own unique traits, living in one body.
And these weren't just random personalities. They each had a specific job. You had Arthur, this very proper Englishman, who was basically in charge of everyone. Then there was Rajan, the keeper of the hate, who the defense said committed the robberies. And Adelana, a shy, lonely young woman, was the one they claimed committed the rapes. All, they argued, completely without Billy's knowledge.
But wait, there's more. Beyond those initial 10, there were another 14 personalities. These were called the undesirables. And they were the ones who were suppressed by Arthur because they held all the trauma, all the rage, and all the awful memories from Milligan's childhood. Getting to them was like finding the key to the whole puzzle.
So the trial wraps up and literally the whole world is watching. This verdict wasn't just going to decide what happened to Billy Milligan, it was going to set a legal precedent for years to come.
And the verdict was historic. Not guilty by reason of insanity. Billy Milligan became the very first person in U.S. history to be acquitted of a major felony by successfully arguing that his alternate personalities did it.
So Milligan didn't go to prison. Instead, he spent the next decade in and out of psychiatric hospitals. It was a pretty wild time. He even escaped at one point. But eventually, in 1991, he was released for good, with doctors saying he was no longer a danger.
But the story didn't end there, not by a long shot. The case was so famous that Billy Milligan and his 24 personalities became permanently lodged in the public's imagination.
And you can see its impact everywhere in pop culture. There was a huge best-selling book about him, movies like Split were clearly inspired by his story, and there have been a bunch of recent documentaries and TV shows. His case just continues to fascinate people and spark all these debates.
After he was released, Milligan basically just vanished. Nobody knew where he was for years. He only reappeared in the news when he died of cancer back in 2014, ending a life that was lived almost entirely in the shadows.
But even after his death, the questions just keep coming. A recent documentary dropped an absolute bombshell, a claim that Milligan had confessed to a family member that he'd actually murdered people, hinting at an even darker story that nobody ever knew.
And so that leaves us right back where we started, with this one massive, unanswerable question that has haunted this case for decades. Was Billy Milligan a tragic victim of unimaginable trauma who truly wasn't in control? Or was he a brilliant, cunning manipulator who figured out a way to beat the system? The real truth might have died with him, leaving us all to wonder.